and welcome to the People's Platform. I will be your host for this episode. My name is Rachel Miselman. Now, normally you see me hosting my show, Bostonian Rap, but today, special treat, hosting the People's Platform, and I have a great guest, a very special guest. His name is Kenneth Nasif, and he is a retired Massachusetts state judge. Today's show, we're going to be talking about what everyone's talking about, and that is the 2016 presidential election. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
It really, truly is an honor. May I call you Ken?
Sure.
Okay. Ken, you are a native Bostonian.
I am.
You went to Boston Latin School.
I did.
You're an alumnus. You subsequently went to Northeastern University. Then you followed in the footsteps of your mother, I believe, by going to Suffolk University Law School.
I did.
Now, what has struck me with your story is that there has been a whole lot of hard work, and throughout it all, I think you've remained quite humble.
Oh, thank you.
Would you describe yourself then maybe as just kind of an everyday man, the average Joe, who just worked hard and kind of went for his goals, went for his proverbial dreams?
I think that's a fair statement. If I were to describe myself, I probably would say something along those lines. I've been living in the city of Boston my whole life. I never had the opportunity to go to private schools because my parents really couldn't afford it, given the fact that I have a number of siblings. And I worked hard. I worked while I was in college. I worked while I was in law school, took out loans like everybody else, and I paid them. I remember being married when my children were young, and I was still paying my law school bills. And I'm glad it happened that way, and I take pride in what I did. Yeah.
And you had an opportunity to do really a great amount of good. You started out your career, I believe, with the U.S. Veterans Administration, and then you went on and became an assistant U.S. attorney.
That is correct.
And that was, I believe, from 1974 to 1983. And
yes.
From there, you accepted an appointment to a Massachusetts judgeship.
I did.
And then you worked in juvenile courts and the district courts. And at one point, there was a statement that you made. You actually commented on a book that the former First Lady, Hillary Rodham Clinton, had released. And of course, now she is the Democratic nominee for President of the United States of America. But it takes a village to raise a child.
Yes.
And so I thought that your response to kind of the philosophy behind that book was very interesting. And I think that, and of course I'll have you comment on this, but I think that it kind of informs us a little bit of why you support Donald Trump, because you actually do.
I do. Because
this is your background that I'm giving viewers, but you are one of the state deputy state directors for the Donald Trump for presidential campaign here in Massachusetts. But let's get back to the quote. You actually said that you don't agree with the idea behind Secretary Clinton's book, and you said that you believe that what we need is two parents, and that they have to have a commitment to each other and a commitment to the child.
Right. I did say that. It came about because at the time I was engaged in a rather noteworthy case having to do with the so-called Attleboro cult case. I was sitting in Attleboro court at the time, and I happened to have this case before me that involved the death of several children by this strange cult that would not feed their children or practice any safe medicine. And two of the children had died, and I ended up jailing, believe it or not, a a woman who was pregnant with a third child, and I did it for the welfare of the unborn child. It had never been done in the Commonwealth of Mass before, and it was a decision I made that was reported throughout the country, actually. But in any event, in the course of all of this happening, I was interviewed by much of the media, including the local newspaper in Attleboro, Massachusetts, and for whatever reason, the discussion of children and families and their welfare came up, and I was asked about, protection of children and, the best way to raise them. And I guess I came out with a comment. I'm not sure why I did, but I felt that way at the time, that Hillary Clinton's recent book and statements were entirely wrong. It does not take a village to raise a child. It takes a mother and a father who have two commitments. First commitment is to each other, and the second commitment is to their children. And I still feel that way today.
And I just said to viewers that I think that helps inform some of why you support Donald Trump, because again, you are one of the deputy state directors of the Donald J. Trump presidential campaign right here in Massachusetts. And, I think that a lot of people might not look at Donald Trump as someone who's traditional, but if you look at his children, I think that you have to really kind of, whether you like him or not, you have to sit down and kind of think, well, obviously he has some values that could be described along traditional lines. They're all very well spoken, well educated. They have all worked very hard to earn the degrees that they have. You don't see, or you haven't heard, and certainly with the way the media is raking over every aspect of Donald Trump's life, if there had been any kind of diva behavior, do you know who I am behavior on the part of any of his children, that certainly would have been reported on. But everyone really seems to say that they're just hardworking, polite, respectful children.
That's true. As they say, the apple does not fall far from the tree. I had the unique opportunity to be with Donald Trump when he was in Massachusetts on one of his visits. And actually, I had this discussion with him along these lines, and I commented to him about his children and how much people respected them. And I remember what he said to me. He said to me, at an early age, I told each one of them, there are 3 things you must never do: cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs. He was very strong about that. And obviously, it would appear that they have obeyed those 3 commandments, along with working hard with him to help develop the Trump company. And I think their character in general speaks well of how he brought them up, and I agree with your comments entirely.
And I have to say, it is particularly remarkable because I do feel like we're living in an age of entitlement. And I would think that, if you do have the fortune of being born into a family of means, that not necessarily, of course, but it is easy to kind of, just think, well, I don't really have to work for it. It's going to be given to me. Everything is going to be taken care of for me. But really, again, you're talking about his children who are all very hardworking, and although they're all quite young, Barron, I'm sure, will follow in the footsteps of his siblings. But the others, I just find that they're all quite accomplished and at quite a young age.
Well, they are, and that's, as you know, they sometimes refer to Donald Trump as the first blue-collar billionaire. And I think that's because he has a touch with the average person. He may be wealthy, but by the same token, he speaks to and connects with the average guy in the street, the average working person. And when he brought his children up, as he explained to me, he made sure that they understood what work was and how to do things and how to build things. And he actually had them laying bricks, working with cement, getting to talk with and know the folks who do the construction work from the ground level on up. So I think he gave them a well-rounded experience. And as you say, too often, children of extremely wealthy people get spoiled, get lazy, and get in trouble. And I saw it myself in the years that I sat on the bench.
And of course, we know that it's not necessarily the case, but it can happen. It can
does.
certainly happen.
It certainly does. I've seen it myself. I've seen children of wealthy parents, adult children, get into terrible things, criminal activity, particularly drugs, over the years that I sat as a judge. And it amazed me that they had so much opportunity to do so many great things, and they just blew it all. And I attributed some of it, or much of it, to the fact that they were wealthy, and they felt they were entitled, and they didn't feel they had to do what other people had to do. And so it can work against you, being wealthy and born with a silver spoon, so to speak, in your mouth.
Yeah, double-edged sword. Now, I want to draw out something that you mentioned, Donald Trump having the common touch, a blue-collar billionaire. I like that because, he's actually proof of what we're saying. Just because you are wealthy doesn't mean that you're going to have offspring who are spoiled. And what's interesting beyond that to me is that, because I will say, and full disclosure, I am also a Trump supporter. Now, that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that he says, and that anyone who has any kind of criticism of him, I'm going to attack him. No, because people have a right to their opinions. And I think in listening to other people's opinions, that actually helped form my own. And that's, I think, why my support of Trump is solid. But, we'll kind of, as this interview goes on, try to be, inject some objectivity into this. But I do think that it's important that to underline, as I said, that he does have a common touch, and that he does speak to people that, quite honestly, I believe a lot of politicians on all levels of government have forgotten, and who have said, you really don't matter. We'll talk about you in our stump speeches, but in terms of actually reaching out to you, not so much. What would you say to that?
I agree with you. I think what you're saying, or at least I'm saying, is he's not an elitist.
No.
And too many politicians, for that matter, he's not even a politician. He's a businessman who sees America going the wrong way. And he loves this country and what it's done for him and his family, and he wants this for everybody. And not being an elitist, he can talk to us, and we can connect with what he's saying and how he's saying it. I mean, I wish some of his statements were said a little differently, but just about all of his messages, to me, ring true, and I think ring true to a vast number of people. And that's why he has so many supporters around the country, particularly middle-class folks and lower middle-class folks who flock to wherever he goes. I mean, Hillary Clinton does not get the crowds he gets.
No, I feel like there's a real enthusiasm, there's a real excitement. And again, for all the politicians who talk about the middle class, it's odd that they do so, and it's in a way that's so, if I can say, disconnected. And I don't feel like that is the case with Donald Trump. And I think that a lot of people feel the same way. I mean, they're responding to someone whom they feel is finally saying, you matter.
I agree. And not to pick on him, but the current president, as an example, the first black American president we've had, a great stepping stone, milestone in our country's history. He had such a great opportunity to bring us together, and this was my hope. And I think he failed, and he failed miserably. And I think it's because he's an elitist. He may not even know it himself, but he's an elitist. And his comments about bitter people clinging to their guns and to their religion, this attitude, you'll never hear this from a Donald Trump type of guy, because he's probably one of those people that cling to their religion or guns. And unfortunately, not just President Obama, but a lot of the folks around him are all elitist. They think we're dumb They think we don't know what's going on. They think they know what's good for us. They look down their nose at us. And this is what has irritated so many people in America, particularly the masses that are going to Donald Trump. And I'm one of them.
I do feel like there is a lot of condescension, and I agree with you that I think a lot of people are very tired of that because, you know, after a certain point, you know, people say, well, wait a minute, as I said a few minutes ago, you know, hey, I matter, I count for something. But let's kind of move on. Let's talk about his rhetoric, because people say that he's racist. People say that he's misogynistic. Okay, he's not a politician, but he is running to hold the highest political office in the land. So what do you think he should do? How should he modify his speech, or should he maybe just be a little bit more aware? Should he learn how to throw on that diplomatic hat in certain contexts? What would you say?
Well, I think as I alluded to a few moments ago, I agree with his messages and what he's trying to say, but there are times that the language he uses to make the point he wants to make ends up being offensive to people, and he certainly doesn't mean to offend anybody. But you've got to understand, he is not a politician. If he was a polished politician, he would know the right words and the right cues. He is, to me, a regular guy who talks like a regular guy. I do not think at all he's misogynistic. I do not think that, I'm convinced he's not a racist. I mean, you look at his company and the thousands of people that he's employed and the positions that he's given women way up high in his organization, including his own daughter, who was second in command. I think it proves that these false allegations about him are simply not true. I think people, particularly those who are opposing him, are taking advantage of the fact that he speaks like a regular guy. He says things that should not be said publicly. This recent episode of the tape when he was talking with one of the Bush young people.
2005.
Right. I mean, to be honest with you, guys talk that way. Guys talk that way.
I mean, I will say that I personally found it offensive. Not as, I don't want to say as a woman, although, you know, obviously as a female, you know, I'm a little bit more, you know, it touches me a little bit more directly, but just as a person. But he did apologize immediately, and I respect that. He didn't try to minimize, you know, the offended, you know, the offended, if I could put it like that, the offended feelings that some people had. You know, some people were obviously very insulted. He didn't try to minimize what they were feeling. And he acknowledged that, you know, hey, I said this, I was wrong, it wasn't the way to speak. It's not who I am. But you know, ultimately, the reason why my support hasn't wavered is because of what you said. I look at the whole picture. And so this is someone who has had a history of, just like you said, putting women in positions of authority, trusting them to run his company, having faith in their decision-making abilities, their business acumen, long before many other people did.
That is true, very true. So I think you shouldn't judge a person by language or words he uses behind closed doors, guy to guy, so to speak, and then just attack him and say, this is the kind of person he is. You've got to look at what he produces and what he does and what his actions are, not what his words are. He's an alpha male. And let me tell you, this is how we alpha males talk at times in our lives. You know, there's an old saying, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And I venture to say if you put 50 guys in here who don't like Trump and are voting for Hillary, not one could get up and say say to us that they never spoke that way behind closed doors.
And I'll say a quick comment, and then I'll move on, just because unfortunately we don't have much time left, and these shows always go so quickly. You know, you have all these people who are outraged, who are still outraged, and I myself don't want to minimize what they're feeling and disparage their perspectives. However, you know, we have a culture where you turn on the TV, you have Real Housewives of this, that, you know, and basically you have women kind of going at each other. You open up these gossip magazines, you know, who wore it better? We don't do that for men. You have all this music where women are denigrated. So I just think that he apologized. Let's look at the bigger picture to really kind of say, this is who Donald Trump is. And speaking of bigger pictures, what do you think this election's about?
I think this election, in large part, is about the frustration that the average American has. I think that Americans have gotten to the point where they finally believe that Washington is broke. It's not working. It's not working for them. People today are working for a salary which is the same, or in many cases less, than what they were making 10 years ago.
They're working for the privilege of keeping their heads above water.
Just about. And I mean, the statistics are amazing about how many people have less than $1,000 in the bank today. Working people, people who have worked most of their lives. And I think people are beginning to believe and understand that people in Congress, in the way Washington works for us, doesn't work anymore. They just get reelected, and they make careers out of public office, and they don't accomplish anything that affects our lives in a positive way. To me, it's amazing how many people in Congress, both senators and congressmen, get elected, go to Congress, and end up becoming millionaires while on the public payroll.
Well,
I could never figure that out.
Well, at least we get some photo ops. So really quickly, how can someone get involved with the Trump campaign? Do you have a contact?
Sure. Well, I would suggest that you go to donaldjtrump.com. There's another site. It would be mass, M-A, the number 4 Trump, MA4Trump, .com, and we have a Facebook page, MA4Trump, and you'll see many different things that you can do or you can participate in and services that are needed.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Mr. Nasif, Ken. Thank you so much, you at home, for tuning in to the People's Platform. Again, my name has been Rachel Miselman. I have been the host for today's show. And what I want to remind people is, regardless of the person whom you support, just please get out and vote. Always vote. There's never an excuse not to do so. Bye-bye for now.